It's almost a century since Frank Hurley captured some of his most famous images in Antarctica. A pioneer adventurer and artist, he's one of Australia's most fascinating and revered photographers. Now, drawing on information from a collection of diaries held at the National Library, a new book shares Hurley's own perspective on his expeditions and unique creative processes.
"100 years ago, very few people had been to Antarctica, but they were hugely curious. And it's Frank Hurley's photographs and films that made Antarctica come to life for a mass public.
I would like to have done a lot more, of course, but don't forget this was done 45 years ago, and the quality of some of these things is remarkably good. In spite of the fact that we were using prehistoric sort of equipment that was more like a coffee mill than a cinema camera.
He was greatly moved by what he saw around him, and so photographically he wanted to give you a sense of the strangeness of that.
An irreverent and at times controversial figure, Frank Hurley is a favourite of photographic historians like Helen Ennis.
Hurley as a photographer, he was incredibly inventive. He would have loved Photoshop because he was someone who never felt wholly bound by what he saw out there. He would often combine a whole lot of negatives because he would be wanting to give you a feeling of the heightened reality. He had frostbitten hands, so operating the cameras was difficult. The cold meant that the lens would fog up. Trying to process his glass plate negatives on the boats in the dark rooms that he had built, those things are incredible.
Hurley explains those unique processes in a series of detailed diaries. The writings add some personal context to what are famous images.
Every foot had to be won against a relentless and cruel wind with bowed backs and straining muscles.
The Hurley diaries are held by the National Library of Australia. They've recently been digitised and added to the online collections.
Here we have just a few of the 28 diaries by Frank Hurley in the library's collection. They date between 1912 and 1961, so from when he was quite a young man to just before his death. They really show him, for the showman he was.
Now, if you think of Facebook and the kinds of things we do online, the precedents for that, of course, are diaries, and travel writing has a really long and good history. So Hurley wasn't alone in keeping his diaries, but the ones that he wrote, I have found them incredibly interesting to read.
So he was the first Antarctic blogger?
Yeah, not only would he have loved Photoshop, he would have loved blogging.
They cover his travels from Antarctica to the Western Front, to the Torres Strait and New Guinea. So we really get a wonderful sense of the breadth and scope of his life.
The ocean, a blue, mirrory expanse, rippleless. Above, a canopy of the most wonderful blue nimbus clouds I've ever looked on.
Helen Ennis has focused her work on two of Hurley's Antarctic adventures, the 1911 expedition with Douglas Mawson and Ernest Shackleton's 1914 Trans-Antarctic expedition.
The Mawson expedition was filled with tragedy, which Hurley was greatly affected by. 2 men died, and Mawson himself was very lucky to make it back to base. When he had failed to return on time, Hurley was one of the men sent out to look for him. So I think that's a recognition too of his great physical strength and his usefulness as a team member.
What characters we looked. Faces nearly black with sunburn and seared with frostbite, begoggled and whiskered.
Now, what Ernest Shackleton, who was an English explorer, hoped to do was cross the Antarctic continent. So it was hugely ambitious. It was in all the English newspapers. Everyone was incredibly excited about it because it was going to be a Herculean struggle to get from one side to the other.
The ship's stem broke off part of the floe on which it was standing. Fortunately, it went up instead of down.
The Shackleton expedition is a famous failure, documented by Hurley's films and images.
Then the mainmast fell, snapping off about 10 feet above the main deck.
This is our good ship Endurance, taken at midwinter. She's rimed up from top to bottom with crystals of ice. This is the poor old ship after the disaster after she was crushed in the ice floes, the wreck. And here Shackleton is setting out for relief, 800-mile voyage to South Georgia, one of the great boat voyages.
And I think some of these photographs that he took are the most important photographs, not just that have come out of Antarctica, but that have come out of the 20th century and have out of the history of photography.
He was very aware, I think, of wanting to create stories for people, wanting to entertain, and I think you get that sense through his films and through his photographs.
For me, the legacy relates to his storytelling prowess. I loved adventure stories when I was growing up. There's no better adventure story than the Shackleton expedition, and I think the reason it's come to life, in fact, still now that it's lived on, is because of Frank Hurley's photography.
It must have been dangerous work taking photographs in the Antarctic 50 years ago, though.
Oh, well, not as dangerous as in war, you know. But still, after all, you take the good with the bad and the bad with the good. It's real good fun.